Good evening to everyone. Let us start the class by chanting Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. So let us turn to page number 3. I'll also share my screen. All right. I think the introduction that Piatan has done for the Anapana Sati Sutra by bringing together content from the commentaries of the Theravada Buddhist commentaries, as well as the Agamas and the Sarvasvadi commentaries, is very interesting. And I think it also elucidates and or sort of shines good light on sort of ways that we could sort of interpret certain words and theories mentioned within the Anapana Sati Sutra. So we'll be reading through the introduction, which has a good amount of commentarial content on the sutra. So Anapanasati Sutra discourse on the mindfulness of in and out breathing. Background. Oh. That's it. Okay. Background. In the Icha Nangala Sutra, breath meditation is declared to be a noble dwelling, a divine dwelling, the Tathagata's dwelling. Because during the rains retreat, the Buddha generally dwell in the concentration by mindfulness of breathing. The chief text of the mindfulness of in and out breathing, Anapana Sati, is of course the Anapana Sati Sutra, found in the Majjhima Nikaya. There are also 4 brief versions of the breath meditation in the Madhyama Agama of the Sarvastavadi. The Madhyama Agama of the Sarvastavadi does not have any such sutra. But there is an isolated text in the Chinese Madhyama Agama. The Pali Anapanasati Sutra is an exposition of the 16 steps of breath meditation in the 4 tetrads and the relationship of the tetrads to the 4 focuses of mindfulness. The 4 tetrads refers to the divisions that we went through, which is, of course, the Kaya-nupassana, Vedana-nupassana, Chitta-nupassana, and Dhamma-nupassana. And elucidated was the relationship to the Satyabhaktan, as we have already gone through in the weeks that we've done the Anapanasati Sutra. The 7 awakening factors and spiritual liberation The 16 steps are found as a separate set in the Sarvastivadi Madhyama and the Sangyutta. The inspiring sutra prologue takes up about a quarter of the abridged sutra. The Buddha has just completed the 3 months rains retreat with various prominent elder monks who have been exhorting and instructing new monks. He then announces that he is staying on for another month, encouraging the monks to put all the effort in their training. On hearing of the Buddha's presence, the monks from the surrounding countryside flock to meet him. The Buddha declares that the spiritual community is filled with accomplished disciples. Even those who are not yet awakened are engaged in various spiritual exercises, beginning with the 4 focuses of mindfulness. This bulk of the sutta records the teaching given on the final night of the 4-month retreat. The main theme of this sutta is the attainment of successive stages of excellence. That is, the 4 stages of sainthood. The Buddha begins by declaring that breath meditation brings to perfection the 4 focuses of mindfulness, and finally singling it out for special mention. Related sutras. The Anapana Sati Sutra should be studied with the Anapana Sangyutta, the most important of which the Ananda Sutta 1, the substance of which is repeated. That is, the 4 other versions of the mindfulness of breathing, differing only in their respective settings. Bhikkhu Sutra 2, unprompted, to the monks at Savatthi. There's a question mark, so wondering if it is Savatthi. The 2 Ananda Sutras differ only in Ananda requesting the Buddha to teach him. Bhante, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One. This is what Ananda says. Guided by the Blessed One, has the Blessed One as refuge. It would be good indeed if the Blessed One were to explain its meaning. Having heard the Blessed One, the monks would remember it. These sutras also share a pericope on the 7 awakening factors, Satta-Bodhanga. The 2 Bhikkhu Sutras too share a similar pattern. The Maharaulovada Sutra closes with the section on Anapanasati and ends with the remark that when mindfulness of in and out breathing is cultivated and often developed in this manner, even the last breath leaves with your knowledge. Even the last breath leaves with your knowledge. Reference to our Sunday classes, where we've discussed this sort of an experience in meditation through the Vipassana jnanas. Not without it. That is to say, when a dying person is mindful of his breath, he dies calmly with mindfulness and clear awareness. Mindfulness and clear awareness, right? Just to draw your attention to, when a person, even if they have lived a good life, even if they have lived a full, good life, right? But when the mind is not awakened with calm clarity brought about with a practice such as mindfulness, the potency or the person could easily, because death to anyone is a very fearful experience. The fear of the unknown. What is going to happen to me? How will I die? What would that last experience be like? These questions are questions that have arisen and been spoken about again and again, not only within Buddhism by the Buddha, but also throughout various other religions, right? This sort of experience of death and facing death has been sort of, brought about or sort of taught or brought into society in a way that we sort of think of it as if the Grim Reaper is coming to take us away in certain ways, right? So this experience, it says that only or for a person to be able to maintain clear awareness during this time, that person should sort of cultivate awareness, mindfulness during the time that that person lives, right? During the time that that person lives, so that the mind will not, even if it was a good life, a wholesome life, a life praiseworthy, even if such a life was lived through, still at that last moment, just as even a snake would bite its own body when sort of coming into harm's way or thinking that it has come into harm's way, in the same manner, even a person who has lived a wholesome life, if lacking awareness and mindfulness, that person's mind during the last moments in this world, or in this life rather, could sort of be restless. Right? Could be restless. The Vishuddhimagga says herein, there are three kinds of final breaths on account of cessation. That is to say, final in becoming, final in absorption, final in death. For among the various kinds of existence, in-breaths and out-breaths occur only in the sense sphere existence, not in the form existence, nor in the formless existence. The form existence, the Rupa Vachara Bhumi, why? Because the subtlety of those bodies there, they do not sustain with material breath, yeah, nor formless existence, because there is no body there, right? Because there is no body there. Drawing your attention, final in becoming, final in becoming, final in absorption, final in death. Final in becoming is the span of the breath, referring to the span of the breath. Final in absorption, meaning when we enter into absorption, or even draw near to absorption and go into a state of absorption, even for a short period of time, the breath disappears. Even in instances such as that, the breath disappears with awareness. You are aware of it. You know that it is disappearing, or it has, or going through that process. Do you understand? And final in death, the last breath that you take at death. Do you understand? Right? So final in becoming, final in absorption, final in death. For among the various kinds of existence, in-breaths and out-breaths occur only in the sense sphere existence, not in the form existence, nor the formless existence. The best known explanation on the traditional practice of breath meditation is given in the Vishuddhimagga. A good reference is Jnanamoli's mindfulness of breathing. Thich Nhat Hanh gives a contemporary popular free interpretation of breath meditation in Breathe, You Are Alive. That's Thich Nhat Hanh's book. The 7 sets. The Anapanasati Sutra opens with an extended list based on the 7 sets and culminates in the breath meditation. The 7 sets are elaborated in the Mahasakuludayi Sutra. In the Pasadi Sutra, the Buddha exhorts thus: Chunda, Chunda, all of you to whom I have taught these truths that I have directly known should gather together and recite them. Comparing meaning with meaning, comparing text with text, comparing spirit with spirit, letter with letter, without dissension, without quarreling, so that this holy life might endure and stand for a long time for the profit of many, the happiness of many, out of compassion for the world and for the benefit, profit, and happiness of devas and humans. For devas and humans. And we find this as a practice even during the Buddha's time, of course, where monks would gather after an exhortation and they would discuss what that teaching meant to them or how they would apply it in their practice. And we have gone over several sutras where the sutras were the results of discussion between senior monks of the Sangha, right? This was a regular practice, right? A regular practice at the time. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha exhorts of these 7 sets. You are to learn them well, associate with them, cultivate them, develop them. Various methods of meditation are then listed, but only the breath meditation is explained in full. Only the breath meditation is explained in full. The commentary explains the reason for this is that a large number of monks take it as their meditation practice. It should also be added that the breath meditation is a key meditation in the Buddha's own spiritual path. The first record we have of his meditation experience is breath meditation when he is a child of 7. On the night of his awakening too, he uses the breath meditation. Yes, Dil.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's a paragraph, the second paragraph on that page. I couldn't understand something, so I'm sorry to get you to explain it to me. It says there, the Visuddhimagga says herein there are 3 kinds of final breath on account of cessation. That is to say, final in becoming, final in absorption, final in death. So I thought that, maybe I'm quite wrong, that if you are in this absorption in jhanas, that you don't die when you're in jhana. Am I got it all wrong?
Well, no, it's not talking to any connection or relation to one another. It's talking in connection to certain experiences. So the final in becoming, right, which is a formation of the body of the breath, right, where we had the upadati banga of the breath. Finding absorption, as we enter into absorption, the breath disappears.
Yes.
Right? And that disappearing process is an experience that a meditator would go through with awareness. It won't just disappear, right? And final, in death, these are 3 different isolated experiences.
Right, okay. Right. So the becoming is that while you are living, each moment you're becoming, and absorption is while you're living, when you go into jhana, and finally in death. Now I understand that different. Thank you, Bhante. The other question is, when you go into, that's not related with it, but it's a question that came to me when I do my meditation session. So if somebody goes into jhanic stages, it's not necessarily that you have even become a stream winner. So, but we know that if you have gone into the 5th jhana, then you have those abhinya and things like that. So is it a bad thing if if you to go to dip into these rupa vachara or arupa vachara words, right? If you go like the void, because if by chance you die and you haven't, but not that you died in the jhana, but if you have had experiences and if you die subsequently, is it then that you will that that you might at the moment of death, obviously the next thought, because if you haven't reached anything, can you after being in those stages go into much lower levels? Or is it, or which level of those jhanic stages? I know that in the fifth one, then you've got all those up, but like, and also in the Suddha, Vasati, or Anagami. But in these other stages, Bhante, can you be in, say, one jhana or two jhanas and not have reached anything? And if that happens, what happens? Do you go and get stuck in those formless worlds forever and miss a Buddha? Or can you fall down? Can you explain that a little bit, Bhante, please?
Well, when one attains to a respective jhana, the corresponding planes of existence becomes potential for the future, for you to be reborn within them if one dies with those respective skills at hand, right? So we are talking about potential, right? You are able to connect to an energy that resonates with that respective plane, right? With that respective plane. For example, the second jhana has a respective plane that that mindset of the second jhana resonates with.
Yeah.
For example, when we, let us say, hatred, which is sort of resembled as this sort of the fire of hatred is sort of it corresponds with the hellish realms, right? Now, it is not to say that there is Mother Nature pulls you there. There is nothing like that. I mean, Buddhism does not, the Buddha does not explain it in that way. Hatred resonates with the hellish realms, right? Lust resonates with the realm of the ghouls, right? So it is all about this resonance. That's one deal. The other one is, if the person, remember that a person who is, for example, with a jhana has a very strong power of determination, right? And let us say the person with this power of determination wants to be reborn within the human realm for the next birth in order that he could work the person could work within the path, right? That will happen then, right? That will happen then. For example, the Buddha had all of these sort of experiences as a bodhisattva before he attained enlightenment during the stories that we know are found within the Jataka tales. So when he had Arupa Vachara attainments, Rupa Vachara attainments, the Buddha did not go to those states or rather those planes. Why? Because of the Buddha's or the Bodhisattva's determination to be within these series of planes, within the central plane, to cultivate the paramis. Right? So power of determination also comes into play when it comes to sort of where you are going next. This is again found in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha says, what you want, you can achieve, right? Dependent on the fact of whether you have those elements that resonate with that plane. So if you want to go to the Rupa Vachara planes, what you need to do is then resonate, develop a resonance with that plane, right? But if you have that resonance yet don't want to go there, the power of determination will keep you where you want to be as well.
Right. Yeah. So, Bhante, supposing if you have the Buddha had, because of the determination, the paramis, yes, he had very strong determination. Normal human beings, you can determine that you don't want to go to those planes. People who are born, even say the Deva realms, right? Or definitely Deva realms. I think, Mante, you told us once that there are some planes in the Deva realms. What are those the 6 realms that you have, where there are, you can hear the Buddha's teachings, because there are advanced beings there who are born as Devas, who have reached certain sainthoods, who you can, if you're fortunate enough, and if that's a practice that you've always followed to listen to that, you can still, even in Deva realms, that you can, even though it's a lot of happiness, you can progress to a high level of sainthood. Is that correct?
Yes, most
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
And I honestly, Dil, to add, I honestly believe
Yeah.
that this sort of the propagation of the idea that, we get stuck in these planes
Yes.
is an absolute nonsense idea.
Right. Thank you, Bhante.
Well, because
Yeah.
and I think this is, I think Sri Lankan sort of preachers are the ones who must sort of take responsibility for that,
Yeah.
because we've created a nonsense motion based on our mundane thinking, and we are trying to sort of imitate or even imagine that this mundane thinking is the same thinking that we will have when we are in deep jhana, which is completely not true.
Right. Thank
Right.
you, Bhante.
Yeah.
That's so really this ability to go into the void, into this blackness, which is not beyond the light and dark, but into nothingness. That is really not something that one must worry about, if that, and worry about, because you're not going to get stuck in that. And the other thing which I want to ask is that that uh, when you're meditating, and when you have these by the time you have meditated for many years, or even for a short number of years, but very systematically and regularly, you have a practice. One day, it's not only the time that you sit on the cushion. The rest of the time, you're always looking at your mind. So that you are looking at. So that one thing is about the first 3 fetters, that the Sanyojana, that get broken in the stream entry. But even the other, the 2, right, the Patiga as well as the Kama, Chanda, whatever, and the Vyapada, those 2 get weakened in the next, and then they disappear. But constantly, Bhante, you're looking at it arising, and so this thing about being really angry and those states, by the time you have been meditating a lot, those things don't happen, Bhante, because you're constantly, when you're not meditating, even if you meditate daily as a layperson, maybe 1 hour you meditate. If you're lucky, I don't know, the people meditate twice a day also. Maybe some people do on a normal day. But what I'm trying to say is, Bhante, those states of anger and extreme, like lust, or I don't know, kama, chanda, whatever you want to call it, those have been listened to quite an extent. So at the moment of death or before dying, I don't know, like Asoka, when something stuck and you might get angry because there's a lot of, but those like extreme fear and things, aren't those by that time quite reduced, Bhante? Because every moment you're bringing it up. I mean, not that you're mindful 24/7, but and also when you practice, you have kalyana mittas, and when you have anything, you discuss even among them. And so very quickly, when something happens, you bring your mind back. So my understanding was that when you're meditating as much and listening to Dhamma, and when you're meditating, those kinds of extreme anger and doubt and regret, that is the whole practice, more than the sitting or the, I mean, of course, the sitting is important to get into states where there are no thoughts, because that's how you sleep, and that's why too much of head thinking and knowledge takes you onto a different level. But for me, that practice in between, the whole of that, the pariyatti, the learning, but the patipada and the practices at other times. So I would have thought that that all these things that one has, the extreme, the things that get gradually reduced a bit and then completed for the lower 5, right? So the first 3, right, and the other 2 would have got considerably lessened. Is that not so, Bhante?
Well,
Isn't that what the practice is?
it truly depends on what ground we are in or experiencing during our meditation,
Right.
right?
Right.
During our meditation. So it truly depends on what grounds we are speaking from, because what the Buddha's admonition has always been is up until stream entry,
Mm.
to be very cautious,
Yes.
to be cautious in body, speech, and mind, so that we do not bring ourselves into positions which could sort of compromise upon or bring about challenges in life in a way that we have no control over it. This is not to say that we exercise control over all domains and areas of life, but this is to do what is possible to keep ourselves away from persecution, from experiences or doing things that might sort of affect us negatively in the future. That is why, for example, the Panchasila is there, the Sila part, right? But of course, up until we attain stream entry, the Buddha would say, be careful, be cautious.
But that's exactly what I'm asking about it, because when you're practicing, right, that is what you do. You have to be really careful of your states of mind. So even when you have a big loss in your life, because immediately you realize, even if it's wealth or separation from somebody very loved, but you at once realize the danger signs come at once, and you are then concentrating on that fact to see that, yeah, that I mustn't go this way. Some other, it doesn't matter if you lose that wealth or if you don't mind, if you can, and you work with that. So you're not at the state that you're in being, but the doing you do. But that practice is what you continuously do one day. Continuously, that is what you're doing. So that you're like what that caution is. For me, that this whole of this practice is that caution that one has till you become stable. That is what you are doing. So gradually, it's not like, for example, before we started meditation, and when we were just listening to Dhamma or doing all the things that as Sri Lankans we do, Bodhi pujas and dhanas and all the rest of it, we were only doing we won't kill and we won't have these misdeeds, in body and lie. Those things we looked, but we never looked at the mind. But once you start meditating, that's what for me, that's what the whole of the practice is. And you tell your people in your family and everybody is, I might be a person who gets angry. So tell me if you see me, so that you quickly come. And that is for me, that, okay, you meditate daily and you meditate 1 hour at this time or whatever, do retreat sometime. But the practice is that. So by the time you keep on practicing for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years like that,
yes,
I think there's a very big difference. There's a very big difference from not having meditated and not having listened to the Dhamma, the Pariyasti and the Patipada come into, I don't know, Bhante. So I feel that if we like this coronavirus thing, is such a blessing. I know it's very bad to say that so many have died and unnecessarily and economy is affected, because look at the time that we spend, because we don't do other things, we don't go anywhere. I don't we have to be going and exposing. So all the time we are practicing, listening to your Dhamma, we are reading, we are meditating, and also you tell the people you're with, right, with your family members or your close friends whom you phone, and your friends are people who are practicing also. So the calls also, you come, and when somebody tells of something, immediately you think of it in terms of Dhamma, and you say, be careful. I know particularly, I had a huge loss, and immediately my best friend, when I said, can you imagine this? And they immediately said, careful dear now, because this is exactly what you have to go. If you're normal, you would think, oh my God, somebody did this and you lost. But that's the practice, Bhante. So I feel that this work we are doing and what you're saying and what we're doing is enormously, gratitude is so much, because we have been given the opportunity to listen, to practice, to discuss, to hear other people sing, and you learn so much. And the Kamatahang you give, for me, I don't know, Bhante, that this is the way we are moving, Bhante, because of this particular situation. If we didn't have the virus, I don't think I could have ever spent the time I am spending on learning. And so we appreciate every word of guidance we get. And even if it is something that makes you feel not so good, you immediately realize, oh, this is about ego. So, it doesn't matter anything. And you turn it into a joy. You're learning something. You've come to learn something. We're looking at ego. Now, I know it when you meditate with Dhammajivahandra, right? I mean, he scolds you like anything in front of everybody, right? And in some of these meditation, Gita was telling me, you're not even allowed to sit on a chair. right? And so she has found this time a place that she's meditating where they were allowed very low. She had to once do a standing meditation because they don't in Sri Lanka, in some of these Goenka retreats. So they're very, very strict and they're very, but the thing is that even that you forgive and you say, no, you're made to feel so embarrassed because you can't sit on the ground or whatever, because the ego, you look at the ego all the time, Bhante. Even if you ask a question and you say something that makes you feel, my God, you said something, but you say, no, you come here to learn. And that's ego, and that's just that's the way you practice. For me, that is like that, Bhante. So that's what I feel, that, this opportunity to be in a group and to say what, and to find out what you know is very useful. And this explanation you have given, that you don't have to be frightened about, going into these states or, going to the void and, all the other things that happen during your mind and things like that. You're not to worry, because it's and if you have made a determination that we don't want that Rupa Raga and Arupa Raga, the sixth and the seventh fetter, that you don't have to think, because we have made determinations that that's why to go. So that's enormously helpful, Bhante. Thank you very much. And I apologize to the group for taking so much of their time. Thank you, Bhante.
All right. Thank you, Dil, for sharing. All right. So now about the breath, right? About the breath. Now, the breath, Anapana. What does it mean? What does it say in the Veda? The key word, ancient Indian, the key ancient, okay, the word is wrong. The key ancient Indian word for breath is prana, which means both breath and life. That is, to live is to breathe. The word prana is a derivative noun, originally meaning the breath in front, that is, the inhaled air, and is combined with its opposite, apana, the breath down or away, that is, the exhaled air, to refer to respiration. This gives this helpful point regarding the ancient Indian conception of breath. Observation of the vital function of these complementary aspects of respiration, combined with intuitions about the function of wind after it entered the body, eventually led Indians to conceptualize and codify the bodily winds and their operations in the human organism. Prana assumed the character of the vital breath. Inhaled air in the process of respiration, and was the principal wind in the upper part of the body, on which all other breaths depended. Apana was the exhaled air and the essential wind in the lower part of the body, right? Of the lower part of the body, which actually draws parallels with what is in the text as well. Ancient Indians identified organs resembling lungs as part of the human and animal anatomy, but they never understood their function in respiration. They conceived the lungs to be the locus of phlegm, and usually the heart to be the seat of the vital breath. Respiration was simply the intake and expulsion of the vital air from the body. Once in the body, it was carried throughout the organism by a series of vessels and stimulated the vital functions of the various bodily organs and parts. Each bodily function or locus of bodily functions had a wind or breath that acted as its motivator. giving rise to innumerable vital breaths, which eventually became codified into 5 basic bodily winds: prana, apana, vyana, udana, and samana. Right? While these terms began a metaphysical speculation in the early Upanishads, they have always been a clear, there have always been a clear, integral, and effective methodology of early Buddhist meditation practice. The terms as such are not found in Buddhism, but what the Upanishad speculated on, the early Buddhists experienced directly and, more importantly, made it available, not just to a select few, but to all who would learn. The first term, prana, is the most common of the 5 winds and is the general term for the breath, and for life, that which breathes, and for life itself. Although the Vedic system generally defines prana as the in-breath, the Pali term here is usually ana. The term apana came to mean going downwards, the breath that moves down from the navel, controlling evacuation and flatus, breaking of wind. Vyana, sorry, it's yana, not vyana. Yana refers to the interval between inhalation and exhalation. That is, when we are very relaxed or on a deep meditation level. The Upanishadic tradition generally defines samana as the breath in the abdomen and associates it with digestion of food and nourishment of the body. However, you might sort of recall that when we do yoga, we are sort of advised to breathe deep into our abdomens. However, as we shall see from the Maharaulova Sutra below, the early Buddhists are aware of both abdominal breathing and thoracic breathing. Now, let us look at the early Buddhist definition of the wind element and the purpose of reflecting on it as given in the Maharaulova Sutra. Rahula, what is the wind element? The wind element may be internal, may be either internal or external. And what, Rahula, is the internal wind element? Rahula, whatever that is, wind, wind-like, and clung to internally and individually, meaning the Atma aspect, belonging to self, namely, going up winds, going down winds, winds in the belly, winds in the chest, winds that course through the limbs, in-breath and out-breath, or whatever else that is wind, wind-like, and clung to internally and individually, this, Rahula, is called internal wind element. Right? Gives us more information in terms of the body of the breath within the body. Right? Body of the breath in the body. Now, both the internal wind element and the external wind element are simply wind element, and that should be seen as it really is with right wisdom thus. Now, what here? Now, both internal wind element and external wind element are simply wind element. This is an experience that we would come into through Vipassana, right? First of all, we see or we observe the breath at the nostrils. moving into, or if we are basing our attention upon the lungs, the abdomen, we would specifically see that body of Upadati Bhanga further spreads into what we then sort of refer to as the body of the breath within the body. When the Atma reduces, that body that we see further expands to include all of these parts, right? Internally. When the Atma is further retracted, if I may use that word with understanding, retracted, taken away, then what happens is the body disappears completely. The frames or the boundaries of Atma are broken, connecting the in winds and the out winds, internal winds and external winds, making it one, all in the process of arising and passing away. Right? All in the process of arising and passing away. When Atma is further pulled, now that essential sort of making it one process also disappears, and it simply is the wind element. Do you understand? Does that make sense? Right? When we haven't come to that specific part of the Vipassana jnanas, but this is where, for example, no, we'll not go there. That will just, right, the wind element. And that should be seen as it really is with right wisdom thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. This is the withdrawal of Atma. Right? The withdrawing process of Atma is done through this contemplation. Right? Done through this contemplation. What we begin to experience at this level is it becomes more and more obvious that this is not mine. This is beyond our control. This is nature. This is like a mechanism, cause and effect. This becomes, you're not implying this. Remember of the word, with right wisdom. And we already know, as a group, we've studied Vipassana, Abhidhamma, and within the sutras, with the text that we have gone through, we've discussed what this sort of wisdom is, and this sense of discernment, how it sort of comes about with Dhamma Vichaya and all of its other terms. This is not implied. This becomes more and more obvious when we come to realize upon letting go through anicca, dukkha, anatma. Right? This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. Right? When one sees it thus, as it really is with right wisdom, when one sees it thus, this is talking about wisdom that has arisen within a person, not the practitioner who's trying to practice this. Do you understand? There's a big difference, right? This is not talking about a practitioner who's trying to now implement this. No, this is talking about a person who sees with the eye of wisdom. It's two very different things. Right? One is repulsed by the wind element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the wind element. Right? Very strong word, revulsed. Right? Very strong word. What or how to sort of make it, or to sort of understand the usage of the word, is the revulsion which arises to the initial ditthi that we had. Do you understand, everyone? The initially, it's like, for example, we do something and we mess it up again and again and again, right? And then finally, maybe a friend tells you, or you watch a YouTube video or whatnot, and then finally you realize that you've been messing up a really small thing, but you know, and you finally realize, oh, this is what I messed up. What an idiot I am. Right? It's that kind of a feel, but it is essentially towards the dignity that we initially had. How could I be so foolish? How could I be so deluded by the aspect of clinging on to the wind element as me, myself, and I when it was never mine? Do you understand? That is the context of the spirit by which the word revulsed is used here, right? By the wind element. By the wind element. The wind element, how we see the wind element, or how we rather saw the wind element, that too is a dict, isn't it? Revulsed by the wind element. Do you understand? Does that make sense, everyone? Right? And the mind becomes dispassionate towards the wind element. The wind element, which is the ditti pursuing or which held that wind element. Yes, Shriyani.
Bhante, this is somewhere towards the Dvitanga Bhavana?
Sorry, Duta.
Dvitanga, yeah. This Dvitanga, yeah. So here we are looking at the, while you are meditating, you're looking at the contemplating Anitya as well. Here.
Okay.
So it can be Dvitanga as well here. This, while you are feeling the sensation and seeing the Anitya as well?
Not really, Shriyani. Oh, can you explain the meaning of Dvitanga, the word that you're saying?
How I understood the Dvitanga means that you do the two things the same time with Anapana and the contemplating the Anitya with it.
Okay, what you mean is Dvianga.
Ah, I don't know. I thought that's the word, yeah.
Right, Dvianga, right?
Yeah.
Anga deka, right?
Okay, yeah.
No, this is not it. Remember, the base of contemplation here is the wind, right? The wind element, right? So basically, wind element following the one and only bhavana that is being done here according to the sutra that we are reading is contemplation of breathing, right? Contemplation of the in and out breathing. Whilst we are on that path or on that method, we observe this breath. What comes about is what we are speaking about. The vipassana, the insight which comes about is what we are speaking about. We are not changing anything. We are still on the wind element. Now, as the wind element becomes clearer, anicca, dukkha, anatma will become clearer, but our main focus is not anicca, dukkha, anatma. Anicca, dukkha, anatma is only the resultant insight that arises.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, not both together.
No, but not only both, all three will and can arise, right? Meaning anicca, dukkha, and anatma, all three can arise and will arise, right? Yeah. But remember, Shriyani, if we say are we doing Dvianga Bhavana or are we doing Anicca Bhavana, then that means the main object becomes Anicca. No, the main object is wind.
Yeah, so because this is initial part of it, right? Later on, once you master this, you can use the Dvayanga technique.
If all, let's proceed. Let's proceed, because if all goes well, the Kanatna would arise naturally, and you wouldn't want to, it won't come to an instance where you have to apply it again.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, understand. Yes, apply. Yeah, understand. Yeah.
All right. Now, right. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. When one sees it thus as it really is with right wisdom, one is repulsed by the wind element, and the mind becomes dispassionate towards the wind element. Right? I hope that explanation was clear, right? Because reality, when we are referring to, for example, the color red or the color burgundy that I'm wearing right now, remember that these are all concepts. These are all concepts, panyapti. Panyapti is held together. We cling on to these panyaptis through the ditthis that we have. So when we are referring to, for example, the word the wind element, we are referring to a panyapti that we built. A panyapti thamai, that is because we can't give up the wind element. Right? That person who clung on to the wind element and thought of the wind element in a more defiled manner, which is, this is my breath, that is what disappears. That is what we become dispassionate towards. Do you understand? Is that clear? Right? All right.
But this is what the whole of the Anantalakkhana Sutta is about. No, this is mind. It's not here. Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, it is. Right. Buddhist definitions. The term Anapana, with variant readings, Anapana, means inhaled and exhaled breath, inhalation and exhalation, inspiration and expiration, respiration, breathing. The dvanda is resolved as ana. Dvanda means the way the word comes, right? Ana plus apana. The verbs are asati and pasati. No, sorry, not pasati. Pasasati. Pasasati, right? Respectively. And the sutra instructs the meditator to first direct himself to asati. He breathes in, right? He breathes in, and then to pasasati. He breathes out. Right? Pasasati. He breathes out. However, there are divergent opinions here. Right? The Vishuddhimagga says that the Vinaya commentary makes asasa as the out-breath, as the out-breath, and pasasa or apana, the in-breath. The Suttanta commentaries, like the Upanishad tradition, however, take them as the reverse. Buddhaghosa, the author of the Vishuddhimagga, himself notes that when a baby leaves its mother's womb, the air is first expelled from within, and then air enters with a fine dust, strikes the palate, and is extinguished with the baby sneezing. Is that true, doctors? Cool, dear. Say something now. You're a pediatrician, isn't it? How is it? Mothers.
What did it exactly say? Where did it say now? Where are we now? That the Buddha Gosha knows that when leaves in mother, the air is first expelled from within, and then air enters with a fine dust, strikes a palate, and is equal with the baby's sneezing. I can't comment, Bhante, because I never looked at it in this detail. But what I do know is that when the baby comes, and if
Yeah.
It's not breathing when it's with this is in very lay colloquial terms. When the baby is inside the mother, all this process of respiration is through the blood that is coming from the mother and through the umbilical cord. And so it's a process, nothing to do with breathing, because there is lico and the baby is not breathing from the nose. So when the baby comes out at the moment, he's not breathing or anything. So that's why they give it a good whack on the back, so that the baby, if there is any liquid and it is stuck in the mouth, that just comes out. And then the baby will, now he's outside the lico and the liquid, and the baby will take a breath in until that, otherwise the baby will become blue and you have to put suckers and pull out anything that's blocking. So what we know is, at least what I know as a pediatrician, is that because the baby doesn't breathe with the nose inside, he's breathing through the mother's blood that comes through it. It goes through the lungs, and the whole filtration happens in the lungs through the bloodstream, nothing to do with the nose. But as you come out of that and you cut the cord, now that is stopped. So the baby has to now start breathing from the nose. But sometimes if it has had an obstructed or difficult labor, you find that, the lico, the stuff in the womb, when you break off the membrane that the baby is in, sometimes goes to the nose and it blocks. So you can't, like when you're drowning, so you can't remove it off. So you turn the baby upside down and you give a good whack on the back, so that the baby will just come out, and just like when you choke and the baby then start breathing. If it doesn't happen, you have to quickly put in the suckers and pull out everything else, so that the airway is now clear, and the baby will then scream or shout or scream and take a breath of air in, and then the oxygen comes, and then the whole thing gets regularized. So I can explain that that's what we do as pediatricians, and and if that doesn't happen, you intubate and you have to put in the tubes in, and positive pressure, you give oxygen. So I can't quite, with the dust that enter, there's a fine dust, and I don't know enough to at that level to say, but physically that's what happens when a baby is within the mother and when the baby comes out. And you have to start a different process of breathing, one that will always through the bloodstream, where your carbon dioxide from the baby is taken out and the mother's oxygen comes, which all happens in the blood vessels in the lungs, but here, and it goes to the heart. But none of these passages are taken, because you can't do that. But once when the baby comes out, you're still connected with the umbilical cord. That process is continuing, and then as the baby comes out, you clamp on the two sides and you cut the cord. Now at that point, the mother's oxygen is not available, so you have to quickly start this process that the baby starts breathing from the nose. So that's why we turn the baby. Quite often you have to give water. Some babies, of course, we start crying on their own, others don't. So that's what I know, Bhante. I can't comment on this. Maybe somebody else can.
After that explanation, I feel like I can give birth to a baby now. All right. So, yes, Devika, you're muted.
Bhante, I was going to say, I was with a very good friend of mine. When she was having the baby, I was holding her hand and waiting. And this baby, as he was born, and the doctor took the baby and it started crying. I don't know how. He started screaming and crying. I was, so that's why I was listening to Dil's explanation.
So that's what happens, Devika. If you don't have any blocks, most babies, that's what they do. When there's no oxygen, they start crying. And with that crying, you take a gasp of breath. And if you have no block, that's what happens. These other things happen. Some babies, you have passage, and that's when it's difficult. So that's why to facilitate, if you're a baby who has come through the normal processes, there is no obstruction, there's no liquor taken in, there's no meconium. So then when as the baby comes out, the baby realizes there's no oxygen, and automatically it cries, you're right, it keeps on crying. And you wait for that first cry of the baby. That's when you rejoice that the baby is normal.
Yes.
Yes. So you're right, David.
Thank you. Just want to share my experience.
All right then.
And fathers wait around, and the in-laws and the parents outside waiting to hear that cry of the baby, because right, with that cry, the normal respiration is established. You don't need anything. So you're lucky your friend was okay. Friend's baby, not friend the baby.
All right. So the divergence is also found in the Mahayana, the Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit and Tibetan texts generally seem to take asvasa and uchchasa as in-breath and prasvasa as out-breath. The Ekottaragama, however, refers first to the out-breath and then the in-breath. Wright Davis says that both terms asasati and passasati are semantically alike, but it exegesis. What is this? Okay. I don't know how to pronounce that word.
Exegesis.
Exegesis. However, they have been differentiated in a way which looks like a distortion of the original meaning, which asasati is taken as breathing out and passasati as breathing in. Among the modern dictionaries, Childers take asasati, he breathes in.
Because of it,
the Sanskrit dictionaries too take asasati as he breathes out and passasati as he breathes in. Okay. Egerton, in his entries on asvasa and prasvasa, remarks that whatever may have been the meaning of the two terms, it seems clear that the compound was commonly used in the sense of breath, collectively and as a whole, which Analeo notes is a reasonable suggestion and certainly sufficient from practical perspective, since whether the breath goes first in or out, the task of mindfulness remains the same, which is kind of the point, isn't it? Yeah, the task of mindfulness remains the same. Breath meditation and Satyabhaktan. In the Satyabhaktan Sutras, breath meditation is presented as an aspect of the first Satyabhaktan. The breath meditation is abruptly broken off, as it were, at the end of the first tetrad. In fact, here, the breath meditation is used as a launching pad in meditation of the body. And for the rest of the Satyabhaktanas, the key practice of Satyabhaktan, as has been discussed everywhere, is a reflection of impermanence. Reflection of impermanence. However, in the Anapana Samyutta, breath meditation is generally presented as in the Anapanasati Sutra, which gives emphasis on all four Satyabhaktanas and the awakening factors. In fact, the Anapanasati Sutra begins as a vehicle for the first Satyabhaktana and ends up as a vehicle for all four. Right? Ends up as a vehicle for all four. Thus, by starting with watching of the breath as body, the bhikkhu naturally progresses to the watching of feeling, mind, and dhammas through the medium of the breath, through the medium of the breath. Finally, this brings to fulfillment not only the four Satyabhaktanas, but also the seven factors of awakening and knowledge and freedom. Now, this is not to sort of say that we will always be sort of, in this process of breath meditation, but breath meditation becomes the main medium through which the practice progresses. And every time as we sit into meditation, we will be using the breaths to go into meditation. And this is true across many ancient traditions, ancient by terms of course, the Anapanasati Sutra Anapana Sutra, which uses breath meditation to go into the four Satipatthanas and lays the Bojjhangas, but is also true in techniques such as the Mahasi technique and the Pao technique, which are more or less the main techniques. Also, the Lady Sayadaw's technique of meditation as well, which we would commonly in a popular manner know as the Goenka Ji technique, which is actually the Pao Sayadaw's technique. Also starts with, I'm sorry, did I say Pao Sayadaw? Which is Lady Sayadaw's technique.
I wondered why you said that.
I saw Dill's face going up and I knew I've done a blunder.
Sorry, Bhante.
Right. Not Pao Sayadaw's technique, Lady Sayadaw's technique, which later went into Saya Ji and Saya Ubakin, and from Saya Ubakin to Saya Goenka Ji, which is Lady Sayadaw's technique, also takes Anapanasati in the beginning to go into Vedananupasana. So we will be using then the breath as a medium to go into that respective stage of meditation that we've achieved and attained to, right? Thus, by starting with the watching of the breath as body, by starting with the watching of the breath as body, the bhikkhu naturally progresses to the watching of feeling, mind and dhammas through the medium of the breath. Finally, this brings to fulfillment not only the four Satipatthanas, but also the 7 factors of awakening and knowledge and freedom. In other words, it is most important to note this: like the Satipatthana practice, the breath meditation is complete in itself, or in the words of Gatin, in the Anapanasati Sutra, watching the breathing is not a preliminary of the Satipatthanas. It actually is the Satipatthana. Once you ask why Anapanasati is singled out for the treatment in this way, one reason might be because it is taken as the normative, not original or only, right? This is, I hope you understand what this usage of the word normative is, right? Basis on which to abandon the 5 nivaranas, establish the Satipatthanas, and develop the Bojjhangas. In many ways, then, look, as we sort of go through the Anapanasati, we've all experienced how insights arise, right? And we then start working through the medium of the breath. We start working, progressing into deeper insights as well, right? And that is simply just something that we do, right? And then keep working. And when we reach, for example, if I may say it in this way, when we reach, let's say, stage 15, I'm just making something up here, stage 15, and when you sit down, you will go directly into stage 15, right? If you are in stage 20, you will go directly into stage 20, right? It's all about that resonance, that insight that has arisen in the mind. During your meditation, you are able to go into it. The Anapanasati Sutra is simply, in many ways, then, the Anapanasati Sutra is simply an expanded and full illustration of just how the Buddhist path consists in the abandoning of nivaranas, establishing the Satipatthanas, and developing the Bojjhangas. Now, I would like to connect this to what Dill was speaking about earlier, right? One of the main difficulties as practitioners, what we face, is the restlessness of mind, which is essentially the nivaranas. When the mind calms down, we experience almost instantaneously the fruits of the meditation, and we find that that restlessness, that internal dialogue, which is on fire in a way with the nivaranas, everything that bugs us and sort of brings us, pulls us into a dark side in a way, into the unwholesome, we find that when that calms down, we find ourselves in a state of peace. What the Buddha then adds on to say is, look, yes, this is peaceful, but do not think or assume that you are out of the danger zone. Right? That you are out of the danger zone. And for example, with the precepts, with the Ajiva Attamaka Sila, where we had the addition of the three Samma Vacha precepts, right? The 4 in total, but with Musavada, addition to Musavada, so 3 plus there on the Ajivattamaka Sila, we find those 4, the Buddha says, when one takes up the Ajiva Attamaka Sila, one will find one's life changing dramatically. Why? Because one of the main reasons that we attract problems into our life is because of this little sort of hole here. Because of this hole here that we have in the middle of our faces, right? The moment that is disciplined, the way that we interact with the world, when that is disciplined, we find that the interactions that we have with the world is now no more a tormenting experience where it comes behind us in the future. In the same manner, with meditation, we find when the mind is calm, when the restlessness, to sort of, draw from, the still forest pool example, right? When our minds are like that, everything is far more clearer. Everything, even our emotions and the way that we categorize and understand the emotions that we go through as human beings, are no more defiled by what we think they are, but rather we understand what they truly are, right? And a big part played to that calmness is by simply the calming of the mind, which Anapana Sati does in the first get-go. Without the calming of the mind, you are unable to see the breath. It really hits the nail right where it should. Hence, Anapana Sati being one of the most strongest techniques of meditation out there, right? One of the strongest meditation techniques out there. Now, because initially when we started off as well together, I did a lot of Vedananapasana, isn't it? Right? Remember? We did a lot of Vedananapasana. It was only later on that we came into Anapana Sati and speaking about Anapana Sati. The Vedananapasana seems quite easier, right, to do, right? And people have actually, come up to me and asked, why don't other monks do this and all of that? The reason is this: you can progress upon Vedananapasana far more easily if you do or have the support of Anapana. If you go with Vedananapasana in the beginning and try to continue along, you will find that you will experience a lot of disturbances that come to mind, not because of anything, but because of the nivaranas. Because of the lack of concentration and the way towards vipassana, without the concentration element, the hindrances are not suppressed enough. Our concentration is not. So essentially, when we first did Vedananupasana, it was literally only a technique that I was employing to get you hooked onto the meditation. hooked onto the meditation to give ourselves a bit of motivation that we can do this, some sort of inspiration, but we came right back to Anapanasati, which you find, Anapanasati you find in the Mahasi technique. Again, Mahasi, Lady, Pao, all of these techniques would always start with Anapanasati. Right, with Anapanasati, even the most ancient Tibetan Mahayana techniques as well. Right, it is a brilliant meditation practice which really sort of tends to the most vital and the most what can I say, the area of mind which needs most urgent attention, which is that restlessness attribute. Yes, dear.
Bhante, you mentioned that the concentration was really important, which is what was lacking between Vedana. But actually, it's a mindfulness, isn't it? It's a mindfulness which is really important together with the concentration. Because if you don't have 4 foundations of mindfulness, even the kind person of the mindfulness has to be there to see when the mind goes on, to get concentration. You have to have immediate, oh, my breath has gone, mind has gone from the breath, we bring it back. So together with the concentration which you mentioned, Bhante, you must say that you have to have the mindfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people, because of samsaric habit of practice, and also by nature not being so sort of restless in mind, there are some people like this, right? They can very easily go into samadhi with whatever technique that they, of the main Satyabhaktanas, right? But unfortunately not all, right? Actually, a lot of young kids can go directly into Satyabhaktan without Anapanasati as well, right? But of course, parents are a little bit too scared sometimes to get them onto, meditation so early in life, thinking that they would become monks and nuns, of course. But kids have a very, very strong potential in developing directly into sort of Vedanapasana and these sort of main techniques, because of course, the innocence of early life, right? So coming back, what is the breath in meditation? Writings from an experiential viewpoint of a practicing meditator of the forest tradition, Sujato gives us an instructive explanation of the nature of the breath. What exactly is the breath? There is a certain experience at the beginning of each breath. There is a certain experience at the beginning of each breath. A different experience in the middle, and yet another at the end, and yet another at the end. These experiences are simply awareness of the air element, but it is perception that marks them off as the breath, right? Remember, when you hear, this has to be approached in a meditative manner, because here perception, sanya, is connected to the Panch Upadanaskandha, right? It is part of the 5 aggregates of clinging. So here perception, the perception that marks it off as the breath, is connected again to Atma Sanya, right? Because that is how the khandhas, the aggregates, become the 5 aggregates of clinging, because we have clung on to it through the aggregate or through Atma, self concept. This is mind that marks it off as the breath, right? Correct to even say my breath. Only the physical impact of the air on the nerve endings is registered by the body consciousness. That body consciousness reports to the mind consciousness, which performs a more sophisticated cognitive task, such as recognition and interpretation, and so on. Recognition and interpretation, and so on. Now, that's a very interesting point, and beautifully put by, of course, Ajahn Sujato, as always. He never fails to disappoint. I'm sorry. He never fails to sort of put a point down in such a beautiful manner. And that is this point. Only the physical impact of the air on the nerve endings is registered by body consciousness. That body consciousness reports to the mind consciousness, which performs the most sophisticated cognitive tasks such as recognition and interpretation and so on. Let us expand on this as a meditator, as a practitioner, where we think that which we experience is the final be-all and the end-all, which is not true. Right? And opening our hearts, our minds with that sense of profound openness to realize that this is not the only boundary or the limitation of it, is very much a part of the insight that arises, isn't it? That is how we essentially move from the localized breath that we see at the tip of the nostrils to then subsequently moving on to the whole body of the breath within the body itself, and then harmonizing the internal air element with the external air element, all the way up until the air element itself becomes something which is not clung to. Something, an insight that arises in such a powerful and profound manner that it changes the concept by which we now look at the air element by. Right? Which Achan Sujato here has put it out beautifully. Right? The function of vitakka to initiate thoughts and vichara to sustain chains, and vichara to sustain chains of thought, is transformed by applying them not to perceptions of verbal construct, but to perceptions of the breath. Again, the function of vitakka to initiate thoughts and vichara to sustain thoughts is transformed by applying them not to perceptions of verbal construct, but to perceptions of the breath, actively directing the mind away from the diversity of sense experience onto the breath. Doing so over and over, the common features of the breath become apparent. By combining the shared features of the breaths recognized by perception and by ignoring irrelevant data, the mind forms a stable and coherent concept or mental image of the breath. By combining the shared features of the breath recognized by perception and by ignoring irrelevant data, the mind forms a stable and coherent concept or mental image of the breath. Right? Of the breath. Does that make sense? You know, this image, this mental image of the breath, if you remember, if you can go back to the initial stages in your meditation practice, when you were struggling to observe the breath, wasn't this the same problem that arose then? The image of the breath made us constantly control the breath into something, to sort of mold it into something that we thought it should be, only to realize just moments later that it's not, that it's out of place, isn't it? So we tried again and again to remove this image, to sort of progress from that image into now a more selfless observation of the breath as it is a part of nature, the involuntary breath, the organic breath, right? And that is what we find sort of spoken of here. And that is what we find spoken of here. As contemplation deepens, does anyone have any questions? Shriyani?
One thing, what I asked for the dviyanga, that means the Vedana. Also, it is you can experience through Anapana meditation, isn't it?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
That's what I meant. Yes. Dvianga. Isn't it the right? Is it not the right term?
Well, I mean, the term can be applied, you know. It specifically, the term specifically refers to sort of minding two aspects of the practice, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is now, to what it truly depends really on what stage or at what
Yeah, I do understand that. Yes. Yes,
you
I
know.
understand that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Yes.
Bhante, the mental image of the breath, is that the nimitta?
The
Yeah.
mental image of the breath, a coherent concept or mental image of the breath.
Is that the nimitta?
That this could be the nimitta, right? This could be the nimitta, right? But basically it is the breath.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you.
I thought it was the train, you train your mind to see the breath. So that's what it meant.
Yes.
That's how I said. You
Yes.
train yourself, and that it becomes the image, the trained mind.
Well, this is the thing. It again depends on what position that you're talking about it with. Now, for example, at one point the breath can link to a nimitta, right?
Yes.
Or, right? Or we also find ourselves in a position where we observe the breath, or we know clearly what the breath is. Right? And actually, for people who've never meditated, we assume that we know the breath, but actually we only realize when we truly sort of, progress in Anapana that I never knew the breath, in the way that the breath truly is, because you find what you thought about the breath or what you thought the motion of the breath might be, all of that was just a construct again. For example, when we use the word experience in the breath, when I would say experience the breath, you have a construct in your mind right away, isn't it? This is what it would then be. If I would say, observe the sensation on the top of your shoulder, you kind of have an idea of what you might experience, isn't it? Right? If I had to say, observe the motion of the movement of the chest, you have an idea, even before you put your mind down to truly observing, you have an idea of what you would be seeing. That is exactly what we remove. That's the ditti that we are speaking about there. That is the boundary, the walls that we've set for ourselves in terms of that ditti. So we feel squared off into just focusing upon that area. But breaking that wall, developing that sense of openness is what that practice then becomes.
So, Bhante, you said that nimitta can come at this stage. I thought nimitta mostly came when your mind was in mind.
Not really. No.
Okay.
No. The nimitta can come at any moment with any practice. And usually it would come in the initial stages when the mind is going into a deeper state or journeying towards from the position of now being aware of the breath or being able to observe the breath without sort of trying to manipulate it or change it, observing the breath as it is. From that stage onwards, the nimitta could arise.
Okay.
For some, it arises early, actually not really. Most of the time, this is the stage that the nimitta arises. For some, it can very well arise later on as well, right? When the focus of the concentration gets deeper, right? But most often at this stage, many people observe or see a nimitta, right? It can be, and what I mean by connected to the breath is, as the breath sort of becomes more sort of clearer, the nimitta becomes more clear as well, right? The nimitta becomes more clear as well, right? So, right. So now this is the end of our session for today. We will continue with the beginning of Achan Sujato's explanation next week, right? All right, everyone.
Bhante, can you
Thank you.
send another copy of this Anapana Sutta?
Yes.
Because I don't have the beginning of it. I have the
Okay.
latter part of the copy.
I will share the link. Okay.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Bhante, please. I was also going to ask for it.
I will
Bhante.
put it
Thank
on.
you.
Thank
It
you,
was
Bhante.
quite interesting. Thank you very much, Bhante. Take care.
Everyone, I will see you all tomorrow for meditation. Goodbye.
Bye, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.